Chapter 44. The Star-Sucking Technique. But that's Anti-King R. Kang Tian roared. Wang Tiqiong was silent, only pressing Kang Tian to death to prevent him from moving. Elder Dan, quickly think of a way, or aren't you very powerful? I beg you to save Anti-King. I'll promise you whatever you ask. The helpless Kang Tian had no choice but to ask the Dan Emperor in the inverse heavenly cauldron within his body for a help. He really couldn't just watch Ant-King die in front of him. In the reverse heavenly cauldron, however, there were no words coming from the Dan Emperor. Dan, old man, I beg you. Kang Tian was filled with anxiety. Kid, it's not that the old man won't help you. It's just that there's nothing the old man can do. Emperor Dan's voice finally came out from within the heaven reversing cauldron. How is it possible? You're an expert at the conjunction stage. A mere Dan stage cultivator isn't something you can exterminate with a wave of your hand. Or Kang Tian's face was full of disbelief. He had seen Dan Lao wave his hand and send Xiao Jin flying back then. Although Xiao Jin at that time wasn't as powerful as he is now, he could still see the strength of Dan Wang. Emperor Dan smiled bitterly and said, if I were in my heyday, I would be able to easily take care of a small Jidan stage cultivator. But it's not like you don't know the state of the old man right now. Under the state of Yuanying, I can only borrow a little bit of the surrounding heaven and earth aura, and use some small means to defend myself against the enemy. Dealing with cultivators below the Jidan stage is okay. But when it comes to Jidan stage cultivators, there is only one way to die. Kang Tian's face was filled with death as he heard this. He couldn't believe this fact. Emperor Dan sighed. A Jidan stage cultivator can already cultivate the three flavors true flame. This flame is the nemesis of a Yuanying. It almost kills you when you touch it. If old man goes out now, if that Lin Baishan refines it, he would definitely be able to advance to the Yuanying stage, and it will be even easier to exterminate you guys then. Is there no other way? Kang Tian asked unwillingly. Alas, brat, look on the bright side. Your Anti-King doesn't even have the strength of the Foundation Establishment stage. Even if you save her, you will still die after 100 years. While you will have an endless lifespan in the future, sooner or later, you guys will have such a day. Emperor Dan let out a long sigh. He had once watched his loved ones pass away one by one, so he knew how Kang Tian felt at this moment. If you want to be strong, you have to learn to be alone. Maybe one day, when you are invincible in the world, your loved ones, friends, and enemies have all died one by one, leaving you standing alone at the peak of this cold world. Emperor Dan did not speak again. There are some things that Kang Tian must bear alone. Not far away, above the road leading to the back of the mountain, 10 Wang family subordinates were escorted forward. Some cried bitterly, some cursed loudly and angrily, and some secretly prayed. But among them, there was a woman who didn't have the slightest look of nervousness, fear, or anger. She looked at the surrounding mountains and trees with a kind face, a soft smile on her pale face. She strangely attracted everyone's attention at once. Even those Lin family children who were holding butcher knives couldn't help but be secretly surprised. This woman's calm demeanor was beyond their expectations. They should know that some of the Wang family's children cried out in pain before they even went up there. But for her, an underling, to be able to be so calm and collected, it could be considered astonishing. Young Master Tian, I know you're right here, but you must not come out. The woman suddenly shouted at the surrounding mountains and forests. Get out of here. Don't fall for their tricks. Come back one day when you're strong to avenge us. If you come out now, Anti-King won't be able to rest in peace even if she dies. After the woman finished speaking, she slammed towards the blade of one of the Lin family's children on the side. The distant Lin Wei saw this scene and quickly shouted, quickly, Dante, let her die. He didn't know who this woman was, but he knew that the woman definitely had a relationship with Kang Tian, and that was exactly what he wanted to take advantage of. However, he was still too slow. That Wang family's son was ready to raise his sword to slash down. And this woman just happened to meet up with it when it was really fast, instantly killed with a single slash, and the bloody head flew up high. Ah, Kang Tian, who was held down by Wang Tixiong's eyes were crimson. Purple blood dripped out of his eyes. He roared loudly, but his voice was stuck inside his throat, unable to send out. Calm down. Wang Tixiong secretly sighed and desperately pressed Kang Tian. In the sky, Lin Beishan's eyes shone brightly, carefully scanning the surrounding mountains and forests. As long as there was the slightest movement, it could not escape his eyes. Seeing that the woman was dead, Lin Wei also looked towards the surroundings. Unfortunately, the surroundings were silent, and there was no figure of Wang Tixiong or Kang Tian. Only a sigh came from the crowd watching from afar. Some people couldn't bear it and secretly left. Some people continued to watch to see if Wang Tixiong and Kang Tian appeared or not. A crowd of Wang family members were also stunned by this scene in a daze. It seems that they did not expect an underling to be so rigid, right? The Wang family's eldest elder was currently being watched by one of the Lin family's elders. His entire body's acupoints were blocked, and he could no longer lift the slightest bit of strength. But he stood up stiffly and laughed out loud, saying, "What a stalwart woman! How can old me be inferior to you?" After saying that, he exploded his own meridians and died with blood flowing from his 7 orifices. Seeing this, some of the Wang family elders knew that they were bound to die today, so they might as well die a quick death. And at that moment, one by one, they blew up their meridians and died. In a moment's time, a group of Wang family executives who had been captured by the Lin family were almost all dead. Only some people who were afraid of death and those underlings who were incapable of committing suicide were left. This scene left Lin Beishan and the others dumbfounded, and the crowd watching from afar was also shocked beyond belief. "Grandpa, let's go back." A voice that was cold to the core traveled into Wang Tixiong's ears. Wang Tixiong was startled, looking down at his grandson, who was being held down by his death, and his eyes instantly shrunk. At this moment, Kang Tian had the purple blood traces running down his face. His pitch-black eyes looked incomparably hollow, and his handsome face was filled with pallor. "Tian, you." Wang Tixiong was shocked, thinking that Kang Tian had gone off the deep end in anger. Unexpectedly, Kang Tian shook his head and said coldly, "Grandpa, don't worry. Grandchildren are fine. Grandchildren still have to stay alive to avenge their hatred." The latter words were almost squeezed out from between his teeth. Wang Tixiong was still a little disbelieving when he heard the words, one of his hands still tightly grasping Kang Tian, until Kang Tian slowly retreated towards the stone cave. Only then did he let out a sigh of relief and followed suit to leave the place. The departure of Kang Tian and Wang Tixiong was not noticed by Lin Beishan in the sky. He was still standing high in the air scanning the surrounding mountains and forests. But unfortunately, the results obviously left him disappointed. "Good Wang Tixiong, Mr. Lin has underestimated you." Looking at the silent mountains and forests around him, Lin Beishan, who was standing on top of the flying sword, was filled with gloom. He didn't expect that so many elders and family children of the Wang clan had blown themselves up. But even they hadn't forced out the two of them, Wang Tixiong and Kang Tian. "Give me all of them to slaughter. Since Wang Tixiong, that old bastard, doesn't care about them, what's the use of me keeping them?" Lin Beishan flew down and said to those Lin family children. Instantly, one by one, the imprisoned Wang family subordinates and family descendants were all killed. The crowds watching from afar were all horrified. Lin Beishan was too ruthless. This was like a river of blood and a mountain of bones. The corpses of countless Wang family descendants were piled up on the road, completely blocking the road down the mountain. Soon after, Lin Beishan brought a group of Lin family's children to build houses directly at the back of the Wang Mansion's mountain. Preparing to stand guard here, he didn't believe that Wang Tixiong and Kang Tian had been holding back in the back of the mountain and not coming out. When the crowd of spectators saw such a situation, they knew that the one family that had dominated the heavy iron city for hundreds of years was completely finished this time. And all of a sudden, they sighed and left. It was none of their business, so they didn't want to set themselves on fire. Outside the stone cave in the back of the mountain, Wang Tixiong looked inside the stone cave with a face full of worry. After Kang Tian came back, he entered the stone cave with a cold face and then never came out again. Xiaojin scratched his ears and sat on the side with glaring eyes. He also followed Wang Tixiong's example and looked at the stone cave. The psychic one knew that Kang Tian's situation was not right and was also worried. I hope he can pull through. Wang Tixiong sighed in his heart. Although today's blow was heavy on him as well, he had after all gone through decades of storms and was still able to maintain his composure. But Kang Tian was different. He was still a child who had just reached adulthood not long ago. And when he suddenly suffered such a blow, it was inevitable that he would not be able to withstand it. However, Wang Tixiong, like Emperor Dan, knew that this was something that Kang Tian had to endure alone, so he did not go in to disturb him. Time passed day by day, and Kang Tian never came out. Wang Tixiong and Little Gold both waited anxiously outside the stone cave. In the darkness of the stone cave, Kang Tian sat cross-legged on the cold stone surface, facing the pitch-black wall in front of him. There was a world of darkness all around him, and only his two eyes, which flickered with an icy purple light in the darkness of the night. It had been 3 days and 3 nights, and he hadn't said a word, just kept his eyes open and looked at the pitch-black stone wall in front of him. Although the Dan Emperor in the reversed heavenly cauldron had been paying attention to Kang Tian, he did not make a sound to disturb him. Elder Dan, you should have a way to quickly allow me to raise my strength. I hope you can teach me. Suddenly, a hoarse voice rang out in the stone cave, and Kang Tian, who hadn't spoken for 3 days and 3 nights, finally opened his mouth. Emperor Dan had been paying attention to him, and a trace of joy flashed in his eyes when he heard the words. But after hearing Kang Tian's words, he was a little hesitant. No, you have to know that the speed at which you are cultivating right now is already very fast. Of course, if there are some rare spirits, Lao Fu can make you some strength-enhancing pills. But where in a place like Heavy Iron City is there that kind of spirit? And even if there is, you won't be able to afford it. Old me knows, it's hard in my heart to want to take revenge quickly. But it's not too late for a gentleman to take revenge, not to mention that it only takes a year or 2 for you to take revenge. I don't want to be a gentleman. I want to take revenge. No matter what price I have to pay, I want to take revenge. Elder Dan, I know you have a way. If you don't tell me, then don't expect me to find you the sea soul agate. Kang Tian said coldly. Brat, you still dare to threaten the old man. Emperor Dan couldn't help but curse at his words. Then he came out of the heaven reversing cauldron and glared at Kang Tian. Kang Tian coldly confronted him without flinching. Forget it. I'll fulfill you, poor old me. At such a great age I still have to suffer the threat of your brat. It's really a tiger's fall. Half a second later, Emperor Dan lost the battle and said to Kang Tian in a good-natured manner. Kang Tian revealed a hint of a smile when he heard this and whispered to Emperor Dan, I'm sorry, Elder Dan, Forget it. Don't say anything. The old man does have a way to help you, but this way might bring you disaster. You could decide for yourself. Dan Emperor waved his hand and said, As long as I can take revenge, I can pay any price, Kang Tian said firmly as he sniffed. Dan Emperor nodded at his words. Then he did not know where he took out a piece of ancient black jade slip and handed it to Kang Tian and said in a grave tone, Back then, the old man and a close friend discovered a magic skill when they were exploring an ancient relic. And this magic skill was very vicious, and at that time, the two of us both decided to destroy it, but we felt that it was a great pity. And so that close friend recorded this magic skill and then destroyed the original. Kang Tian sniffed and picked it up. Curiously surveying the black jade slip in his hand, he couldn't help but ask, "You're old, man, and that one really didn't cultivate this magic skill." Emperor Dan sighed at his words and said, "All people have greed, even old me is no exception." The old man finally couldn't help but read a part of it. Just this part almost made the old man go off the deep end. Good thing the old man had a strange encounter back then. He had cultivated a Buddhist mind, fixing incantation. That's how he escaped from death. And after that, he never dared to read it again.